All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Phil Maskell. Phil is a senior producer currently working in Wellington at Weta Game Shop as part of their special projects division. He's been in the industry for over 20 years and worked for companies like EA on huge successes like Buzz, the quiz show, and among others. So today I'll be talking to him about his experience getting into the industry and going from QA to production, how the industry has changed over the last few decades, and where technology is taking the industry and how production is helping us all do that. So thanks for joining me today, Phil. I really appreciate it.
That's all right, no problem.
Yeah, so I think your experience at Buzz, I really want to get I want to kind of dig a bit deeper into that. But I think what I'd love to know, what I think is really valuable, is how you got into the gaming industry. I think a lot of people are inspired by these stories. So I'd love to know why you chose gaming as a career 20 years ago when it was still probably a very niche topic, and what your kind of experience was getting your first job in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's does seem a long time ago when you say it like that, but yeah. So I think from as far back as I can remember, probably since the age of about 11, something like that, I was just all I wanted to do was play games, and I was really interested in cars as well when I was young. Um, and I just the second I got a Spectrum. ZX, and I could afford like one tape a week every time the creation and the magic of the box art on the tape. I just remember this vision in my head of wow, this is going to be amazing. And of course, when you load it after half an hour of noises, you get a few pixels bouncing around, but you still, as a kid, you're like, this is, how could it ever be better than this? And so for years, that's all I was doing in my downtime. And I went through, my first job was actually in a nursing home, which I loved for different reasons. And then I worked at the airport for a bit, but every time I got home, I was like, okay, what games do I want to play? What games do I got? And all my friends played games and stuff like that. And then I was just sitting there one day, like, what am I going to do with my life? And I was getting really kind of anxious because all I really enjoyed was cars and video games. And I was quite a social kid, but I'm an only child, so I very much enjoyed my own time as well. I was like, how am I going to do this? And I used to run down to the local shops and look in the games magazines, and just check out what's happening all the time. And on the back of one, it was just this ad. It was just like, do you want to play games for money? I think that's what it said, something like that. I was like, well, that sounds magical. Is this some kind of gimmick, Um, so this would have been probably 1998, and I was like, okay, well, where is this magical place? And I was living south of England, and the job advertised was in Guildford, and it was for a company called Bullfrog, who I knew them because like Theme Park was one of my favorite games, and Dungeon Keeper and all these other games I used to do, Populous and things like that. So I remember driving up there with my mum the day before just to make sure I knew the way, because it was quite a lot. It was like an hour drive from my house, and I hadn't passed my test that long, so I was quite nervous on the big roads. And then I went up for the interview the next day, and I just remember sitting in the car park, pretty much having a panic attack and just like, oh my god, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. And Bullfrog in Guildford, they're I don't know if it was their very first office, but it might have been, was kind of round the back of this pub and in this building, and you're like, oh, this kind of looks a bit dodgy. And but you get to the front, and it had this massive statue of Horny, his name was, which was the Dungeon Keeper main character. And then you open the doors, and it was like walking into my own personal Disneyland, and there was
Cool.
characters everywhere. MTV, which was still cool in the late 90s, just about, was on all the walls. There was a pool table, and everyone was just laughing, playing games and making games. And I was just like, what is this magical place, And I got led through into a room where we basically had like a 3-part test, and one was problem solving, and one was actually just getting an old build of a theme park world, which was one of the first games I actually tested. And it was just, can you find bugs, and what's your problem solving like? And they interviewed a lot of people. I remember I think it was like 150 or 200 people or something for
Wow.
8 QA jobs. And eight of us got through that stage to what was, we were like, wow, it's amazing, we're set for life. We all started on like 10 grand a year and we were working all the hours, but no one cared, because it was just like, I don't care if I'm getting paid nothing really, because this place is amazing, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was the first kind of intro, and I found a bunch of bugs, and it turned out that just through playing games, and I love problem solving, that was just my jam at that time. I was just like, okay, well, I keep finding bugs, and at the end of each year, and it wasn't really fair looking back, but you had a bug count on each game, and the top people almost had like a scoreboard. And people, the problem with that is that people log loads and loads of C bugs to try and get up the scoreboard and repeat things and write bad bugs for programmers. And it was just the way it was. There was no test plan even, really. It was like, there's a sort of design doc, just chat to people, you'll get to know it. And then just as I was joining Bullfrog, Electronic Arts bought them. And so I saw the end of an era of people like Peter Molyneux, and a few other people who went off to make like Mucky Foot, and who were working there when I joined, who very shortly after left and started their own companies like Lionhead, which was just around the corner, which I used to go over to and help test Black and White just for fun and things like that. I had a bunch of mates there. And so EA bought Bullfrog, and I remember at that point it was like, nothing will change. It's still kind of a cool indie studio. And then they moved us to Chertsey, which wasn't too far away, half an hour, into this epic building. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Inception, but there's a scene where the stairs never end, or it's like a 3D. Right. That is the building that we used to have. And from the sky, it was intended to say EA, but it only ended up being the E because they never built the A or something like that. And then it was like, okay, we're kind of being monitored a little bit more. We got a pass to log in, and there were good things and bad things. And looking back at the time, I was like, why are we being watched? And don't they trust us? It's like, how are you logging hours and understanding who's working on anything if you're not getting some element of control? So you remember at the time feeling really restricted, and even staying overnight playing Rainbow Six and then sleeping under the desk and then starting work again the next day. We used to do it all the time.
Wow.
But then suddenly it was like, what were you doing in the building at night? Like, we were just playing, we're your best employees, and all that stuff. But it was cool because we started off thinking a little bit more about what we were doing, what we were testing, and how that was going to work, and started working with a guy called Pat Russell and Nathan Jacobs, who were starting to build a system for testing, essentially automated test plans with some free testing, and making sure that you're breaking down a game fully. And the first bunch of games I tested, we didn't really use it. I worked on Superbikes and a Theme Park World, as say, on PlayStation 1, and a whole bunch of other games there, which was great, early FIFAs and things like that. But they started to break it all down into like, here's all the testing areas, who has tested it and how have they tested it, to make sure that area is assigned to someone different next time. And we had a studio of 120 testers or something.
Wow.
And that prepared us for getting Harry Potter through. And I worked on 3 Harry Potters after that. Actually, there was a little stint I did at IDOS in between there, but because that was the trouble back in the day. As a QA tester at EA, certainly in the UK, you're all on a contract, and that contract lasts a year. And at the end of that year, you had to have a month off through some contract law. And then if they needed you back, you would come back, but there was no guarantee.
Really?
So
it's like forced. That'd be so uncomfortable, especially if you're really having a good time. You have to
well, when you're on a low weight as well, you're like, I can't afford a month off. I can barely afford noodles at this point, like.
Is that still the case over there?
I don't know. I'd like to think it's changed. I know, EA get a bad rap about a bunch of stuff, and some of it's definitely justified, but I still know some great people there, and there's people that are just putting their everything into making games. And I mean, that's quite a harsh world we live in, with reviews and people hating on companies without really thinking about the humans that are there and really trying to make a difference from the inside. But yeah, at the time it was definitely pretty harsh. And at Christmas they would kind of cull everybody. They'd keep like 10 of us on, and again, I was lucky that first Christmas I got kept on, but my 12 months was ending, and so I started looking around, and I had a friend who worked at Eidos. He was testing the first Tomb Raider at the time, the second one. Anyway, I ended up going to London for a year, running a project team in Southfields, just down from the main office at Eidos, and just testing a bunch of games there on Dreamcast and PS2. I think at the time was just coming out. Did a couple of PC games, and I was responsible for running the team testing one game, which at the time I thought was, wow, this is the top of the chain. I'm still in QA in a section, not to bag QA, but I was like, wow, I get to even talk to real programmers sometimes. I still like, everything was so new and fresh and interesting. But it was really cool. I had a great time there. And then my old boss at EA eventually called me and said, hey, look, I can get you a full-time contract if you come. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And I ended up going back to EA for quite a few years. Yeah, and that's when Harry Potter kicked in. And I guess they used to send me, I was the smiley kid, so they used to send me to all the different developers around, even around the world, who needed help running their QA teams. To where I was working on the first Harry Potter, and they sent me out to Seattle for a while, working at a company called No Wonder Studios for the PC and Game Boy version. That was in 2001. Because that's when the Two Towers got hit, and I was in the States, and I was as far from New York over in Seattle than England was, but the whole country just shut down, and I was 21 at that point. Just kind of felt stuck in America, going like, what's happening, and looking back, it was obviously that was a terrible thing, but I was out there, I was 21, I had my own rental car, I had the company credit card, I was just bouncing around. People from QA were coming over from England to help, and I was there for a few months, and just helping test Harry Potter in the States. And
wow, it's amazing that at 21 you're able to be sent overseas and go to all these different companies. That's such an awesome experience to have at such a young age. Do you feel like the kind of the industry in the UK, and maybe in the US as well, if you're exposed to that enough, do you feel like it was a lot more like, were there opportunities like quite frequent, like compared to New Zealand, where I feel like there's a couple dozen companies that are kind of working on games that are kind of released? Did you feel like in the UK that there were, in every city there was a different games company, that there's a lot of community feeling over there?
Definitely. So in the UK I got sent around so many different studios. Even when I was at Eidos, actually, I ended up being lucky enough to go all over the country, working for, where did I work? Up in Nottingham on a project called Time Splitters. I don't know if you remember that. It was the team who made GoldenEye. So I got to go and work with them for a while. That was their next big project after GoldenEye. Well, actually, after Project Dark, I think it was. Was that right? Yeah, something like that. And I worked on Shogun Total War, and so I was bouncing around the country as well. But I think it was just, you're in the industry, and there wasn't that many people that knew kind of how it worked. I mean, there was and there wasn't. It's not like today where you've got courses that you can study to become a games developer or work in a particular field. Back then, it was just people who could do it were people who learned to do it in their bedrooms, basically, and then came to find companies. And then when they got in a company, would bounce around other companies. So see a lot of the same people. And EA was obviously an American company. That's why we got bounced around the States quite a bit as well to help. But yeah, I think more so you had the chance to get a job and travel more back then, just because of the way the industry was. It wasn't so, like, you can hire a tester in the States, it would be much higher. There's so many around
Yeah.
now. Like
Yeah.
there's a million people who know how to do a really good job of QA. Why would you ever fly someone around? Why would you ship someone? You know, occasionally a publisher will send a QA member to a dev team or something like that still, but I don't know how much that really happens anymore.
Yeah,
There's
the
so many
tools,
people
the
that are
tools
good.
and everything are so vast now, and so connected to like human connection that you can just have a Zoom call or have a presentation and really communicate the same message for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you guys before social media was a thing? How was the main way of kind of communicating and building that community back then?
Just Morse code mainly, right? From the start, and then we had the string with the cups. That was no emails, and I mean, I remember just sending builds that would take forever, you know, and they would drop halfway, and that was it actually was part of the reason why I ended up getting out of games to try something else after a few years. So on the third Harry Potter game, it was just I was sending builds all over the world once we'd QA'd them, like to Japan and things for testing. And they would take like a day, and I'd be there at 3 a.m. making sure that a little green tick was at the end of the bar because there was no way to notify me at home because those systems weren't set up.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so that it was just email and sending builds through VPNs, and yeah, it was painful, but also it was exciting, especially testing on you know, there was no internet as such for games. There was no, oh, we'll just patch it if there's bugs. You're
Yeah,
making a disc. There's no going back, you know.
yeah.
And I mean that brings its own comedy. I remember we were testing Theme Park World, and one of our QA members found this bug that was just constantly reproducible, and was we got the whole dev team over around him, and he was repeating it. Um, and they were just pulling their hair out, like, because it was going to manufacture, it was going to print, and that cost a lot of money. They're like, how have we missed this? How is this possible?
Oh
Turned out
man,
he had a bit of Kit Kat stuck on the bottom of the disc.
no way.
And everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but you know, like, you don't really get those weird, wacky moments anymore, just stupid things like that. But yeah, it's definitely changed so much. And I talk to people now who are still in QA or working in other industries, but looking back on that time and refer to it almost as the Wild West. It's just like everyone was doing their own thing, testing in their own way. There was office jokes and pranks all the time. QA was kind of where the animals were, if you like. That's what the way it was looked at, and then people kind of became that just because that was the thing, you know. Um, and it's just yeah, it's changed so much, and I'm glad it's changed. You know, it's a career path now, and then some of the testing you have to do on mobile products and network products is you have to really be switched on. There's so many parts to it, and you know, even balancing version numbers and network issues and trying to debug and explain to programmers how things have gone to find a bug or whatever. It's intense, you know.
Mm.
And I'm glad it's a career because for years people in QA didn't get the recognition that they deserve. Like it's not an easy job, and you feel pressure to make a product at a certain quality bar as well. Like it's
Mm.
um, so I'm glad it's changed for the better. And from there, I found that people at QA where I started went down the design or production road. And as I say, it was actually sending a build to Japan one night where I thought, hang on a minute, I haven't seen my family in weeks. I haven't, like, what am I doing? And it just so happened I saw a job ad for just working with kids in the States doing like adventure sports.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I decided I was just going to apply. And I got a phone call the next day going, hey, look, if you can leave in a week, we've got a position for you. And I went off and did that for a couple of years. And I
Oh,
still
nice.
managed to get a games console hooked up in a cabin somewhere in Virginia, you know, just because I never stopped gaming. But yeah, I mean, I find that I do that in waves as well, you know, 5 or 6 years in the industry, 1 or 2 years, just break because it's hard to explain to people, and everyone always says, "Oh, you just play games for a living," and it's like
Yeah.
you don't understand how intense actually making a video game is, and it's not, you know, the world doesn't end if the game doesn't do well, but it is people's lives, and it's, you know, you've got to be on the ball all the time, and the more procedures you add in, and the more you've got to be at every stand up and every meeting and everything's got to happen, people have bad days, and it's like, oh, I just can't face it today. And that's a real thing, and recognizing that and allowing people the freedom to go, you know what, I need a bit of a mental health day today, or I need a break, or whatever it is the way to keep people motivated and have staff retention and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely like a crunch stigma in the industry. I feel like, from my experience, it is becoming more discussed and more talked about, and companies are becoming more conscious of that. But I mean, I'm sure it's always going to be an issue as long as, you know, you're delivering a huge project that takes years to develop.
And the attitude as well internally makes a big difference. You got people who are senior going, you know, looking at their watch when you're leaving at 8 p.m. going, not early, you know, and you're like, no, it's 8 p.m. What do you mean? Yeah, and I was lucky again after EA and coming back from working in the States. There was a friend of mine who used to work there. I think he was a producer. His name's David Amor. I think he's running a company in Brighton still now. He decided to open his own company down in Brighton, which is where he was from. And he was like, right, I'm going to make this a 9 to 5 company. And this is where I work making buzz. It was called Relentless Studios. It was like, wow, you know, 9 till 5 in my hometown. And my friend there said, hey, look, do you fancy coming on to do some testing and some asset management and start to learn about getting legal clearances on video clips and stuff like that? So that's where
cool. Yeah,
that's where I started. Yeah, but there was, you know, and it was a bit controversial at the time, but he was like, no internet at your desk apart from your email. We've got a bank of computers. You can go and check the internet anytime, or, you know, do it after work, because at 5 o'clock we kick people out.
Wow.
And that was like, people were like, but I like being on internet at my desk. Like, yeah, but you also don't do any work, and you're checking YouTube and or whatever it was then, and maybe not even YouTube, but
Totally.
but it worked, and people got used to it. And then at 5 o'clock they were like, okay, I can go now. This is awesome, and it's quite unheard of even then in the games industry. But it gave us so much control, you know. And so when the first Buzz came out, we were making it was just the music quiz, the first one, and I worked on the tail end of that. There was about 20 of us, I think, working on that, and obviously Sony were publishing it and paying for it, and then we were like, oh, we expected to do like, I don't know, 100,000 units or something just to tide us over as an indie studio. And we came back after Christmas and it had done like 2.5 million units.
Wow.
And we were like, what?
I read something. I read something that over the Christmas period, after the release, it didn't do very well, and then up until when it released, up until Christmas, there were conversations about Sony maybe pulling the plug on it, and then it was after the Christmas holidays that it really kind of took off. Is that kind of how it went? Was there a
from
stage?
Memory, yeah, we were very close to finishing, and it was like, well, let's just put it out there. And I mean, originally it was different. We went through a lot of iterations, and the hardware was the sticking point for a bit, because we were insistent we wanted our own physical buzzers, because we actually, when we started, we put a picture of a 5-year-old kid and a picture of a 90-year-old woman on the wall, and we were like, these people need to be able to enjoy this game together. So every decision you make, think about that, you know. And it was just this visual thing.
That's cool.
And so the rounds were never like hold one button and tap another. It was always smash the big red button, choose your answer, or something, you know, something like that. And having those design constraints actually made the game better, because we were working within those. And so it was more about how interesting the experience was, rather than trying to figure out how to do it. Which
That's
is
crazy
for everything anyway. But
the fact that you know, Buzz was such a success is, you know, it could have either been a huge failure or a huge success because of the hardware requirements. And I've played that and when I was at school in economics class, we played the big quiz, and it was what an interesting project, I feel. And there's a few things I want to talk about when it comes to Buzz, with how it tied into education and like teaching through gaming. But one question I want to ask real quick is what was it like working with such a big IP? Because Buzz ended up going on to winning a bunch of awards for like best IP, best music game and things like that. What was it like having that pressure, kind of, because you guys produced several iterations after years? What was it like trying to maintain that kind of public
Yeah, it was
brand?
interesting because when you're in the moment, you don't really think about it, And that first game, we were like, it's kind of a bit, to use one of my mum's words, like hickledy pickledy. It was just a bit all over the place. And Buzz was a giant clam for a long time, and that's why his mouth moved like that in the first few versions. We never changed the mouth tech.
Yeah.
So and we had Jason Donovan on board, which was always interesting. He's pretty famous in the UK through Neighbours and a bunch of other stuff he's done. So people like that, but I don't think we ever really looked at it as this huge IP. We knew we had something, obviously with the sales. And then when we came back after Christmas, that's when I got promoted to producer, and they were like, you know what, you can do this job. We know you can do this job. You're going to produce this. We're actually doing 2 versions this year. I think the next one was the Hollywood quiz I worked on. There was another, it might have been the big quiz. And we ended up doing 1 or 2 a year, and I produced it for almost 6 years.
Wow.
But we were a really tight-knit team, and we grew to about 120 people at our max as well, working on multiple versions across consoles. So we took a long time in the middle to go to PS3, where we actually were able to kind of add network connectivity, and we were always trying to go like, what can we do to keep us fresh? We were, as far as I'm aware, we were the first game to integrate Facebook on consoles. And that was the challenge. I was chatting to Facebook a lot in the early days, just trying to get that linked up. And you can create your own quiz online, and it would come down to your console, which was a fairly new thing, like putting a console online to actually generate content. And we had a lot of things that actually never even made it. We had Microsoft released a game called 1 versus 100, where 100 people were playing in an instance to try and win a prize. So we went down a long path to create a version of Buzz, which was like a Buzz Online, I can't remember the name.
Battle Royale Buzz.
Oh, kind of, yeah. So the crowd was in there, and you'd vote, and they would lift up their like color of the answer they wanted, a bit like Ready Steady Cook, but in a virtual way. And we'd gone so far as to speak with Spotify about delivering content. There was another company that delivered videos at the time. And we were looking into getting metadata into the files of the music so that we could generate incorrect answers of the same genre or type automatically. So when you download stuff from Spotify, it would always have that data in, because we would upload that to their library, and it would be no data at all, but it would allow us to basically create a music quiz that was never ending, because every song would have that bit of data in, and we'd be able to generate questions from it. And we went really far down this road. We had a live announcer and everything, and then the budget was pulled at the end. I guess the numbers were starting to dip for Buzz at the tail end.
Needed to pivot to mobile. Was that ever a thing?
Yeah, so the company started to pivot to mobile, and as well, going back to your original question, the IP was never really a thing, because we used to just go and sit in the pub and design it as well. Like we would get a bunch of board games, get all the mechanics out, and just sit in the pub, have a couple of beers, and go like, what's making us laugh? What? And it was just as simple as that. Cool. We all agree that this is hilarious. Let's put this in. Let's make a round of this. And just the joy of creating it came out in the game, and it's without the pressure of timelines and deadlines. And I mean, going back to the 9 till 5 a little bit, that allowed us to plan it perfectly. We never missed a deadline. We knew how long a prize would take to make. We knew how long rounds would take roughly, and our team size. And we were never pushed to go, well, actually, you need to do more. We were like, we know we can do this much in 6 weeks. We had 6-week milestones. So we're going to deliver you this round in 6 weeks, and concepts and some prototypes for the next one. For 6 years, and we never failed.
I mean, I think that speaks to the talent of the producer of the project, because I mean, that's ideally what you want is the producer to be able to budget time and estimates. And were you quite heavy in the like planning and structuring? Did you make changes with the I don't know, were you quite deep in the budget of how much it would cost to produce one title? And
No, so we had it was a little bit shielded from us in that we knew how many people we had and how many hours we had, but as producers there, and producers are funny in terms as well, depending on what company you work for. You know, some producers are full project managers and not really traditional producers, which are, you know, have a say on some of the creative. There, we had a project manager who would be across planning, and I was a producer, so I'd work with them to make sure the priority tasks were in, and they would work out the really hard project managing stuff, which I learned much later on in my career. But then it was just like, this is a mystery. You know, I appreciate why we do stand-ups for communication and all that stuff, but you know, forecasting and figuring out velocity was just like, I don't care about that. I just want to make something cool, and I've got this team, and I know how much I can do. And I don't think you get away with that quite as much nowadays. But having a project manager, or essentially like a scrum master now, I mean, the industry's gone to different terminology and different approaches to things. Yeah, I don't know how, if there's any kind of companies that have just a producer who's still leading creative as such. You usually see like a creative director and or a production director or something like that. But yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely changed a lot. But yes, I was involved with it, but not in charge of delivering exactly the project management style. Yeah.
Totally. That's really interesting though, because you went from working on like consoles to then coming to New Zealand to work at Gameloft on mobile, and now you're at Weta working on their special projects, AR, and whatever else they're working on. Has there been like a core production process that you, like you mentioned stand-ups before, do you think stand-ups are, if you were to kind of start a new company with a new team, are there any production processes that you would definitely implement straight away that you think are really valuable?
Yeah, I mean, stand-ups are brilliant because sometimes, for a number of different reasons, you know, communication is key to everything, as with most things in life. So if everyone's there in the morning and they're telling you where they're stuck, then you can help, and telling you what they did yesterday, and you go, okay, it's finished, I can review that and send it to a client or whatever it is. It's just a bit of a catch-all as well, because sometimes systems are not set up in the best way to where you can easily understand what's done. You know, Jira is set up a million different ways in a million different companies. Handsoft is, you know, a great bit of kit, but you still got to go back and go through everybody and try and see where they're at. And you know, being careful in stand-up, it's great to let people know if you're going away the next day, or don't forget I'm on holiday next week, and just those reminders. And it's a good way of just getting humans together, because what I found of late is that people will hide behind their monitors and message on Slack, and they could be sitting next to each other. And I remember back in the day where it was like, get up, go talk to them, have a conversation, drag someone else in if you need. And sure, it's disruptive, but it makes you feel like more of a team. You can't misconstrue something that someone's typed, you know, you just go, did you mean that? Oh no, I didn't mean it like that. Oh, cool. Okay, cool. Whereas on Slack, people sit there and go, oh, that was mean. Did you see what so-and-so said? And it's like, well, no, that's not what they meant, you know, go talk.
Yeah, there's an interesting argument, not argument, but discussion about disruption versus kind of communication, and just building community, building a friendship with your colleagues. Do you encourage? So do you see the value in tools like Slack, or do you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's great. I love it. It's just an example of you know, why it's good to get people together and talk.
There's a balance, yeah.
There's definitely about Slack's amazing. You know, I can be on Slack on my phone when I'm out the building, chatting to different clients on different versions of Slack, and just all at once. Like, it's great. I can flick files to people and go, what do you think of that? And it increases production massively, you know. And there's a number of great tools. And the struggle, I think, at the moment is that there's so many different things, especially when you're trying to agree on what to use and which plugins to have, and then the team members don't have that plugin and they can't see the thing. And that's project management life today, unless you've really got a very, very smooth setup and it's all working perfectly. I haven't worked anywhere that has a fully working setup where every team member is happy and knows how to burn down and why. And you still today are going around tapping people on the shoulder going, hey, can you put in your hours? You know, it's the fight of the producer versus the staff, and it shouldn't be, and it shouldn't be any conflict, but it's always like, oh, do I have to do that? Oh, I've got to log in. You know, and I think just communication around the why and why it's important to understand. It's not about tracking you, it's about understanding the budget and where the time's going, so we can make better decisions on an asset that we might make later, or a pipeline we might need to improve because, you know, other people have done this in a week. It's taken us 3 weeks. Why is that? It's not about you, it's about how do we improve it and make, you know, educating people on about, I don't know, feeling like they've got their backs. And I was very lucky when I worked at Relentless, I had an amazing executive producer, Darren Tuckey. He's still probably the best mentor I've ever had. And he wasn't particularly technical. He didn't teach me a whole bunch about that side of things, but he taught me a lot about management and listening and just feeling like I always felt like he had my back no matter what. And of course I made mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes. And every time he did, he would never point a finger at me. He would say, hey, this happened at our studio, and sure, we need to change this and that. We've learned from it, we'll move on. And then he'd talk to me afterwards and say, hey, look, here's a couple of things that happened, which is why that ended up that way. Break it down and go through it. And then talk about what could have changed. And quite often, again, it was like, well, let's just go out for lunch and chat about a couple of things. And then that was it. And on the way back, I was like, cool, I've learned something. I don't feel like I've, you know, done a horrible thing. And it was just the more confidence I was given because of that process, the better I became as a producer, and the more confident I was to go and talk to publishers and teams and things like that. And
that's cool. I really admire you saying that. I think there's a lot of value that can be extracted from there. So I want to kind of reword the question and see if you'll answer it in a different way. So what advice do you have for people when their project is reaching release? What advice do you have for the kind of mentality that they should have about going into it? Because from what I've heard, I haven't delivered too many projects, but I feel like every project has its things that go wrong. And I'd just love to know your perspective, or how you'd like to teach others to go into a launch of something online, you know, how to react to the things when they go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the absolute basics. So there's stress that comes with launching a game, there's no doubt, you know, and there can be a million things going wrong, or you might have visibility of a budget running out, and you've got to get it out by a certain time. So you're making bigger calls and cutting features that designers are screaming at you need to be in, whereas you know that if you try and put it in, there's no way you're going to make it at all, you know. So going right back to just taking little walks, taking a good deep breath when these things come at you, writing an email but not sending it is quite a good one.
Okay.
Just rant in your own email, go for a walk, have a glass of water, come back, read it. Yeah, that's not cool. Right, let's reset ourselves. And that is such a small thing. It can be like a 5-minute exercise. It can make the difference of weeks or months of morale dropping because you've flown off the handle about something that you absolutely didn't need to. And resetting yourself to, you know what, as important as it is to us and the team right now, we are just making a video game. Like, people aren't going to die if we don't do this thing. Sure, it might be horrible. It might lose their jobs down the line if this doesn't go right, because of the companies, smaller companies especially, make and break on one title a lot of the time. There's a lot of pressure with that. But we're making video games. Like, remember that, just to add that in, and then look at how you can help people. That's the best thing you can do. You know, if someone's struggling with something, well, don't have a go at them, because there's a reason they're struggling. Maybe something's happening at home you don't know about. Like, reset yourself first, I think, is the best bit of advice, and then open the conversation with people who are struggling for whatever reason. And of course, you do get people who are just over it, but they're still there collecting paychecks, and that happens too. And you recognize that, and you just set goals for them slowly, and sometimes you can bring people up back to where they were. or sometimes it's better that they do leave and they find something they're passionate about, because it actually ends up better for both sides. Someone's passionate about the thing they're doing, and you've got budget to hire someone else passionate about what you're doing, and that's just part of it as well.
I feel like that's an area that people don't really talk about enough, but have you ever had to let someone go or fire someone? Or like you just said, sometimes it's the best option for that person. What is that process like?
Yeah, it's never nice, ever, especially if the person's not expecting it. The majority of the times I've had to do it, it's usually something has happened to the company that we're reducing by 10% for a reason, or whatever. And so justifying it to yourself in order to tell someone is easier, because you have to cut it back, and you can just say, hey, look, we don't have a project to QA, for example, over the next 6 months. We can't afford to keep you. We love your work. We could potentially bring you back in 6 months. We'll see how it goes. They're easier conversations to have. Performance ones aren't particularly hard, because you usually go through a process with HR where you have a first review of what the person's not doing correctly, or where they need to be, and then it's on them to hit a milestone. And if they don't do it, then you get a second one, and by the third one, especially in New Zealand, you really have to have 3 to be able to let someone go, unless it's a position you're letting go, or a department or something. In my mind, it's on that person at that point. You have given them 2 very clear roads to getting back to where they need to be for their role. Hopefully you're offering them other options as well, if possible. It's like, oh, okay, you're not really enjoying being a producer, but I see you actually program in your spare time. What do you feel about starting sort of on a different ladder, and we might be able to carve out a position, or whatever it is. But the short answer is it's never nice, but it's never, in my experience, because it's a personal thing. It's never because someone doesn't like someone. You can't really do that. And if you're doing that, which I think happens in America more because they can hire and fire quicker, you're not a very good manager.
Take the emotion out of it. It's not an emotional decision.
Yeah, and the first few times I had to do things like that, or awkward conversations. I remember having one with a guy who I definitely won't name, who had a pretty bad body odor problem, and people were passively aggressively leaving cans of deodorant on his desk, and he didn't get it. And having that conversation I think it was the first one I had to have that was awkward. That's why I remember it so well. And the guy just had no idea, and he just was so embarrassed, and that was awkward. And I took that home and I worried for him. Like, I'm quite an empathic person, so that's where I have to do a lot of work, is not to take too much feeling home with me, because it can ruin your weekend or months if you've let someone go that you particularly liked. Or you have to just understand that that's part of it, and if people aren't really enjoying it, then I think it goes so far as to say almost 100% of the time people have let go because they're underperforming and don't want to get to that level, go on to find something that they are passionate about. Because when they don't have a job, they start to think, hang on a minute, what is it I really like in life? And with exceptions, I'm sure, where you have to pay bills and you get something you don't like, but more times than not, they end up doing something that they're far more passionate about, which works.
Yeah, so it's a good thing. It's reframing the perspective.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask you. I saw that your role at Weta Game Shops changed from being a senior producer to a production director of interactive, and I'd love if you could speak a little bit more on what that change means. Just for my sake, on how that shift changes your day-to-day work.
Yeah, sure. So I can step back a little bit. So when I left Relentless, went off to the States, and then where did I go? Yeah, no, I went traveling after that. So at the end of that time, I was like 30, 31, and I ended up coming to New Zealand and traveling around Southeast Asia. Then I went to Gameloft and got into mobile, and that's obviously where we first met. And so I spent a lot of years just learning about freemium models and understanding how they worked, from what I considered evil when I first got there to, okay, well, people are experiencing these games for sometimes a year and paying like $20. That's all right, And and then through to leaving there and working for a couple of other companies, doing gamified versions of things as well, and some games. Always producing, or I was like executive producer over there. And then I got more into the budgets. That was with Rush Digital in Auckland.
Yeah.
And that taught me a lot about quickfire projects and hitting very tight budgets for clients, especially marketing companies who wanted to do something cool, make something a game or technology based in a very short period of time. And then after leaving there, I worked for another company in Hawke's Bay, which is around tech as well, as product manager. And then that's when I got offered the job down at Weta Workshop. And so that was initially for working on Magic Leap products, which you know, because you came down and helped us with some of those. And that was a really interesting moment. Obviously, Weta Workshop's a fantastic company, and they do just the most amazing things down there. And so that was very tempting. And I was in, say, in Hawke's Bay in the sunshine, knowing Wellington was calling with rain and wind. But the job was worth the move. And so, yeah, we started looking at AR products, and we're working on Dr. Grordbort's, which I think you've talked about in, I listened to one of your other podcasts, but it's for everyone who hasn't, it's basically the halo of Magic Leap was what we were attempting to make, and we were developing that whilst the platform was building. So there were so many challenges because the hardware was changing along the way, and optimizing to something that's changing is a nightmare. And I was brought on to essentially hit the date. We were due to launch the hardware and the game at Leap, which is a conference Magic Leap were putting on, and we weren't quite ready. And there'd been a lot of R&D for a lot of years, and struggles with the tech. And the team there were just, basically a bunch of geniuses who had gone in so many different directions over the years, and then needed to pull it all together. And so I was brought on just to start looking probably more on the project management side as a senior producer, starting to put stand-ups together that made sense. They were in little teams that weren't quite working and weren't communicating well. So communication was the first thing, and then figuring out velocity to an extent, to understand how much work we could actually achieve over time, because there were so many things getting in the way with the development of Magic Leap as well, getting to the final version, and the OS was changing, everything was changing. So it's like, well, how much time are we actually taking figuring things out versus implementing assets or actually finishing our product? And it turned out that actually it was much lower than we thought, and the amount of work that they wanted to get in the game, no way it was going to happen. So there's a lot of tough conversations and a lot of proving the data to say, you're only going to get this much in. I'm telling you now, look at this. And eventually it was like, okay, we get it. And we cut back to that, and we just made it on time. And I always do that with no crunch, like I won't do crunch again. Basically, I don't think it's healthy. There was a couple of weekends we had to, and I think there's benefit in doing it for a couple of weeks at the end of a project, but that's it. So we planned that, we executed, we did it, we launched on time, and all things went well. And we did some updates afterwards to fix some bugs. But as a senior producer there, that was my focus, to work on one big project and get that done. And then it went on to do Weta Workshop Magic Leap relationship went on to build a couple of other products. One was called Boosters. So I started to oversee more products rather than be focused on one. And I was in a lot of conversations with Magic Leap, and we used to fly over to Florida quite a lot. And so the difference really is that I said, hey, I feel like I'm directing production at a higher level now. I'm working across multiple projects. I'm working with other clients. I'm at a higher level, and I'm not getting into the details so much. This feels like a different role. So I met with the manager and said, hey, look, this is where I feel like I'm at. What do you think? Do you think this is right? And they said, yeah, we do. We think that's right. So I got promoted to production director a year and a half ago, a little while ago. And then obviously Magic Leap went their separate ways, and they've gone more into the enterprise field. So the entertainment side's dropped away. So we've kind of done a bit of a reset at Weta Workshop. and we're getting back to, we're working there to make games. What kind of games are we interested in making? We have some of the most talented people working there. Artists from the films like The Hobbit and Blade Runner are there, who have come to our department who want to make games. And so we're working on a few things that I can't speak to, one of which is pretty big with a pretty awesome IP, and there'll be news soon, hopefully. But we're building some pretty awesome stuff. So yeah, watch this space for that. But the team are super excited about it, and the morale is high at the moment because of the focus on a couple of things that are just way more in our wheelhouse of just creativity and storytelling. I mean, for those who don't know Weta Workshop too much, it's started off as a manufacturing facility years ago, and obviously building props and things for Lord of the Rings, and that's the thing people talk about the most. But there's so many movies that we build things for and have touched, from like Thor to Blade Runner to Mulan, just a million different things. But we actually have 6 divisions. We have a consumer products division and a tourism division. We've just opened a big experience in Auckland called Unleashed as well. But I don't know if you had the chance to go
Not yet.
Which is a sort of magical movie experience. And as a company, we have all these different divisions: location-based experience divisions, a design division, and so consumer products. We make some amazing statues as collectors all over the world, and it's our attention to detail and quality and narrative that really sets us apart from other places I've worked. I've worked with some amazing teams in the past, don't get me wrong, but Weta's thing is just the attention to detail and quality, and that only comes about with passion and the passion that people have there. So yeah, I feel very lucky to work there, and certainly to be production director for our interactive department. So it's mostly games, but we also do like tech solutions, and we did a bunch of stuff for Unleashed in Auckland, and that's what's interesting as well. And
yeah, that's cool. I'm really excited to hear what Weta does, because I think it would be great for just the New Zealand gaming industry as a whole, and having big IPs associated with projects in New Zealand. So I can't wait to hear more about what you guys are working on there. For the last little bit of the podcast, I'd love to just talk to you about where you see the future of gaming going, because you've been with it since Morse code in the cups. I'm just joking, but you've really seen the evolution of it and seen how fast technology's kind of sped things up and saved time, and just how technology's created new experiences from consoles to mobile and the freemium model, to now you're working on AR and where there's a big crossover between experiences and games. And where do you see the future of it's a very heavy question, but if there's anything that you can share just from your experience and the things that you touch on a daily basis,
it's very interesting. Yeah, there's so many parts to it, and I self-check myself. I'm 40 now, and I still like big games. I'll go home, sit on the sofa and get into something, like Valhalla or whatever it is, and I still enjoy that. But you look at how different generations play and different cultures play, and it's quite interesting. I think there'll always be a place for playing games at home in a chilled fashion. Like working with AR and VR over the past few years, there's always the friction of, is the thing charged, or do I have space, or I have to put this on my face, or whatever. And there's I think there's going to be a world in which there'll always be some kind of PlayStation at home, and a place where VR will need to be at the right price point and the right accessibility, I guess, for people to get it. I think there's a space for AR and VR. Like working with Magic Leap, there's truly a magic to watching content come out of your physical space. Like a portal opens on your wall and a robot jumps out and hides behind your fridge. Like that's the future, right? And we've done that. For those of you who've accessed a Magic Leap, it's really special. There's something there, and that's why Magic Leap got so much investment. It's like you play that and you go, wow, all right, yep, it's a bit buggy, yep, the field of view is low, it's essentially dev kit, the first version, but it's like you can see the future. And in VR, it's the place to escape. You can make your own world and be fully lost in it. I think down the line there'll probably be a device that does both. It'll go from VR to AR in your space, and you'll be able to see through, and you get one device. It's probably something way down the road, like that. But I think that the world will become more used to putting things on your face as the devices just end up creeping into more normal life. So in the same way that PCs, I got one. I mean, I wanted to play games on it, but I got it because mum and dad thought I'd be educated and I could learn some PCs. I got an Amiga, or even my Spectrum was just like, oh, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
You'll learn how to type or something, Meanwhile, I'm just trying to frantically learn DOS so I can load a game. And so there'll be, actually, I was in New York when I worked for Rush doing like a gamified fuel pump, and I went to a conference out there where they were using AR for surgeries, and that was really interesting because they were scanning people's arms or whatever it was, and 9 times out of 10 veins run in the same places on everybody's arm or whatever, but they were scanning it and then overlaying it in AR because the percentage of accidents with scalpels nicking a vein or a nerve was still quite high. But because you've got a virtual version of that person's actual scan of their arm, the mistakes were reduced by a massive percentage. And they could always call in a surgeon from another country digitally to stand there and see through the camera and advise on things they might find. And it was just improving the speed and quality of the surgeries. And you can see that in engineering, and the HoloLens is being used in a whole bunch of places as well for similar things. And you can imagine a world in which that stuff's creeping in because it just helps people.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, I've got this thing that dad runs this big business. And I mean, that's where I started gaming. My mate's dad had a business and he had some really powerful PCs, powerful in the day, and then when they weren't being used for work, we'd sneak on and try and play Command and Conquer and things like that. And it was like, that's where I think it'll make some
the shift is going to happen once people start using headsets for work and for other purposes other than playing. Like games is almost like a secondary use of the hardware. I mean, not when you're talking like consoles and things, but that is a really interesting thought. Like so many people, I remember when I was young, I would use my dad's laptop to download games and to play games that I'd heard about, or play flash games, whatever they were. And so that is an interesting point as to how culture is going to shift to these headset devices.
And education as well. I mean, when I worked on Buzz, we actually got the curriculum from the government and put a version of a quiz into schools in the UK. And the teachers, their feedback was like, we've been trying to teach these kids these things for months in some cases, but because they wanted to win the quiz and because it was on a PlayStation, they learned everything so that they could do well in the quiz. And even that kind of very basic early version of that just goes to show you that with the right platform or format, kids will learn so much more. And I think the future of gaming and AR will come through that in some form. Like part of education will be playing games because it's fun. Because learning out of a book is quite boring, and not everyone learns like that. There's visual learners too. And I've done a few little education pieces and worked on a project about keeping Kiwis out of debt, called Debt Empire, where it was a clicker where you had to try and get as much money from people as possible, but it was always like taking money from grandmas on a really high % loan and teaching people how to be evil, therefore teaching them about the different loan types. Right. And you got to double the money back if you answered some questions on, do you know what this loan is? Is it worth getting a loan to get a mobile phone? And maybe a house loan is worth, all that stuff, and it just changes the way people think about learning. And it's, from all the projects I've done, it's always surprising at how much of an impact it has to gamify, if you will, some part of a learning process. So.
Yeah, I think the gamifying movement is huge as well, like education and all those things. And it's a weird thing because some areas you see it's like a game first that teaches you something, and some it's coming from an education first background, and then it's kind of layered with gamified things. And I feel like it's not quite there yet, but the conversations are definitely happening as to how a game can teach you to do things. If I was to ask, like one of the last questions before the end is what are some key points of the kind of like if you were to gamify something, just like the deck clicker you're just talking about, how do you gamify something, like anything? Are there some trends that you think are clear for what
Yeah, I
something
think,
is gamified?
I mean, the key is understanding your audience, like having a profile for that person. So what is it that they do? What is it that you need them to do or that they want to do? And how do you bridge that gap with something interesting? So what's interesting to them? I would use an example of like, I don't know, like a person working in McDonald's who is there with their team. They're doing pretty well, but how do they get to the next level? What's interesting for them? What if you linked all of the McDonald's in the area, in the country, in the world together in some kind of tournament of performance, and have levels based on them that they could track through their own phone as well, so that when they're at work, they're humming along, but they're always like, oh, I got to this level thing. I'm in the draw for this prize that could be us. Maybe it's our team. Maybe that's something that's prize money. Maybe it's something else that doesn't really cost the company too much. But at least when you're driving to work, you're going, oh yeah, I've got that thing today. Or, oh man, we were in the running for the thing last week. And if it's a constant based thing, it's like, this is kind of cool. I don't want to necessarily flip burgers forever, but I'm really enjoying this moment in my life. And it could be anything, like imagine going to a company and going, wow, I know their training program is actually a giant VR thing. And so I'm going to spend my next whole week doing this amazing adventure. And at the end of it, I will have learnt lessons about how this team works and how to move things around. Or I can see a world in which, for those who like gaming, there are ways to learn that are for them. I can imagine a world in which everything's a bit more Ready Player One, but for education and learning for on the job stuff. Yeah, I think it's just being relevant, because I've seen some really bad sort of edutainment products, and it's not fun. There's no depth to it. There's no story. There's no, not that you can always apply a story, but there's nothing specific to you. It's just like, oh great, I'm being taught, and they painted characters on top of what I was going to read anyway, and this is awful,
Yeah.
And yeah, just thinking about how you teach people, and sometimes flipping it on its head, which is what we did with the debt game, making you the person trying to get money from people. You learn about them because you're trying to win, but you realize that actually it's bad, just flipping things on its head to be the worst, so you can see,
Yeah, there's definitely like so much experimentation that can happen with different game mechanics to see how they teach someone or change someone's perspective. And I feel like so many experiences haven't been challenged yet to kind of have that innovation. And it's exactly the kind of journey that I hope to go on with this podcast, is to talk about things like that, as to where, if we will be living in a future where there's a gamified fuel pump that, like, you see companies doing that now with their apps and trying to make things more colorful and gamified. But I'm curious to know how deep we're going to go with integrating gaming into every area of life.
we're just scratching the surface at the moment. I mean, that fuel pump was fun. Didn't have fuel going through it. We actually put it outside of baseball stadiums, but it was an official fuel pump, so it looked real. And you just had to stop the handle when the fuel got to $7.77 or something like that. But it had to wind down, and it was quite hard to nail it. But if you got it, you got like $100 fuel voucher or whatever. And it was with Mobil Exxon, I think we're paying for that one. But, it was just a silly little thing, but like my friends and their parents and my parents to some extent play games and puzzle games and Candy Crush and things like that. And it's, if the friction doesn't seem too much, people are willing. And I've noticed that even again with my parents, they're like, oh, it looks a bit complicated. And the second you sit down, you go, actually, it's easy. It just looks a bit busy. They're into it, you know? And I was quite lucky growing up. Like Dad would always come play Mario Kart with me when I first got that. And he still have a go at that every now and again if it's around. But yeah, it's just reducing the friction to games, because everyone likes to be entertained or have a good time, and doesn't necessarily need to be competitive. It's just about enjoying something, and the more, certainly for me, the more I enjoy something, the more I remember it. And at its most basic form, like that's what you want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast episode, but like mowing the lawns, I feel could be made more fun if if with an AI headset on, you could see the lines of grass that you're cutting, and you get bonus points if you cut it right on the line to make your cutting more efficient.
I'm just thinking of AR, Plants vs Zombies, where you've got
you got little zombies to run over. Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely, I see if something can be made more enjoyable, I see that being more successful than the counterpart that is more boring. So it's almost a no-brainer that things are going to become more fun and in turn be more successful.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes. Like you can imagine a world in which you've just got a contact lens in.
Yeah.
And that does everything,
Yeah.
And I don't know if I like that world.
Yeah,
but it would be amazing to be able to just see everything and track everything, and everything will come easy, but also you lose something, I think, along the way, when you get to that level.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what trying to understand that thing that you're losing is another area that I really want to dig deeper into, and knowing how far from reality we can go before things don't feel real anymore. There's some interesting conversations there, and actually that's exactly the kind of mood that I want to end the podcast on. I love this whole high level, what is the future going to be kind of conversations, because I think that's how we're going to get to a better future, is by asking these questions, seeing what trends are, and seeing what shifts are happening. So I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. I loved hearing your story from what the industry was like 20 years ago. I think it's important to know how fast things have changed in the industry, and yeah, so I appreciate you sharing your experiences there, and I wish you the best with the projects that you're working on at Weta, and I can't wait to hear more about them as they're released. And who knows, maybe in a few years' time, in a year's time, we can talk about what changes you're making in the gaming industry, and I'm sure you'll have a completely different perspective of where it's going to go. So I appreciate you giving me the time. And if anyone's interested in following you, where can they get in touch with you online?
I'm not too much across social media, I'll be honest.
That's cool.
Because one of the things I like to try and do is step away and get out into nature and things when I'm not at work. And I think it's somewhat kind of comes with age, but yeah, you can certainly find me at Weta. If for anyone who wants to contact or come through, I recommend going down anyway, just to visit the tours and things there. It's pretty fantastic.
Totally. Well, if anyone listening to this has a question for Phil, they can ping me, and then I'll be the filter, and if it's good enough, I'll ping Phil about it.
Oh, perfect. Or on LinkedIn, of course. You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of this. This is the longest episode so far, so I appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your holiday in New Zealand.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.